So I've just watched a video by YouTube's own resident professor of communication, Corey Anton, and Corey was waxing on the contemporary relationship that exists between these two attitudes, these two worldviews of science and of religion. And I have to thank him for the very well articulated uh, concerns that he expressed. I myself am trying to um, write a dissertation on, um, really exactly what Corey is talking about. I want to look at religious and scientific cosmologies, and really uh, another way of describing these two attitudes would be to look at what's called the premodern and what's called the modern, or what we could say is the ancient and the modern. Um, and I want to understand how, and in fact why. I want to describe how and explain why humanity has taken this turn. Well, first took this turn from the scientific to the religious, and is now being faced with this sort of collision between what had been separated and the inextricably um, interwoven nature of these two types of stories that we tell ourselves. Um, that it's the postmodern, or it's the post-secular. It's that sense of um, in the enlightened modern self having come to uh, a lack of certainty about its own beliefs regarding the world. The white European man had a certain conception of nature. It was something dark and mysterious, something that had to be put on the rack so that its secrets could be uncovered, through this method of torture, of objectification, where one ignores the screams, um, the disfigurement, in order to perform the experiment, which reveals something essential about um, the practical, um, instrumental value of what we're studying. So, in other words, we poke and prod at the non-human world, nature so-called, and we try to see what laws emerge as it attempts to respond to our experiments. Science has always been instrumental, Western science, in that it is inherently uh, technologically oriented, and that its metaphysic is essentially mechanical. The ancients had an understanding of mechanism. Um, they actually built very complex machines, given the materials that they had available and the modes of production that they had available. Archimedes was able to do some astonishing things, to perform some amazing feats of, um, you know, contrived force exchange or artificial release of energy according to designs that he laid out geometrically on a two-dimensional plane. Um, but it wasn't until Galileo and the scientific revolution, Descartes, Newton, and so forth, that we actually began to take the mechanistic metaphor uh, for nature as what nature actually was. So unlike the ancients, who saw that nature was, the artist was internal to the work. When you think about nature, like for someone like Aristotle, nature is self-organizing. It forms itself, whereas art, or a machine that a human being builds, um, a machine built by a human, is such that the artist is outside of the work. The engineer designs the machine from outside for a purpose that the machine knows nothing of. And so there's this sense that for the modern, this metaphor was collapsed, and this scientific, materialistic way of looking at the universe in terms of a giant clockwork machine is, in fact, a literalization, a misplaced concreteness, as Whitehead would call it, of what the ancients understood to be, um, you know, a set of distinct ways of operating in the world. Corey suggested that religion was going to have to come to terms with the disclosures of modern science. And I certainly think that's true. But Corey also said that science needs to reconcile itself with creativity and novelty, and also what Corey calls the once occurrent, or the individual. Science deals with the general, with the pattern, um, but nature or reality is full of spontaneous events, irreversible processes of evolutionary unfolding, where certainly after the fact, after a particular form emerges in the course of the evolution of the universe, we can turn around and look back and say, well, here is why, here's what the situation was, and why this particular possibility was realized. But now, in the present, we can't compute or predict or deduce what the next moment in the evolution of the Earth will bring. Um, this would have been true even without human beings, right? The history of non-human life on Earth is full of mass extinctions and, the spontaneous emergences of new, more complex forms of life that then overran or completely reshaped what had existed prior. Um, and Stuart Kaufman, the complexity biologist, has written quite a bit about this, that there's um, a certain non-computability of the future of the biosphere. But this becomes completely obvious when you add the human element. The human has completely transformed the nature of evolution itself, the nature of life on Earth. We've entered the Anthropocene. We're no longer in the Cenozoic era. We're in the midst of the sixth mass extinction event, and this one was caused by us. We haven't seen the worst of it yet. And so somehow an organism has emerged on the surface of the planet capable of operating as a geological force. No matter what we do tomorrow and in the coming centuries as a civilization, whether our species goes extinct, or we're able to transform ourselves into um, a way of, we're able to transform ourselves into a civilization and adopt a way of life that's congruent with the Earth system. Um, whatever happens to us, we've already left an echo that will resound on the face of this planet for the rest of its existence. We have fundamentally altered the course of evolution, and as human beings embedded in a legal system, as part of political communities and national communities and corporate communities, it seems, although they don't really operate as responsible members of community very often. Um, we now exist in a context in which we're responsible for deciding what happens to the only example of life we have in the universe. And in that context, I think religion, as the ancients understood it, becomes an interesting question again. When you talk about morality, when you talk about what we ought to do with our freedom, you're dealing with a religious topic. As Galileo said himself, religion doesn't tell us how the heavens go, but it tells us how to go to heaven. In other words, how to be good, how to live the good life. And from a modern or postmodern perspective, we look back at these ancient understandings of ethics and morality, and we call them objective, as if they assume that there's only one truth and that they have it. And certainly, it can become dogmatic in the sense that one becomes blind to the beliefs of others, and the perspectives of others when we think that there's just one truth. But the postmodern situation in which either there is no truth or every truth is your own, subjective creation, um, the problem with that is that we can't live in community. Uh, and what the ancients were saying, I think, if we adopt their perspective more authentically, is that there are many communities within which the human community exists, and the Earth community and the cosmic community of you know celestial rather than terrestrial beings, not supernatural. There were two forms of creation, or two sides to the creation for at least the biblical peoples, ancient Israel, and Greece. In fact, if you include the New Testament and the Greek sort of adaptation and universalization of the singularity of the Jewish religion, there were two sides to creation: heaven and earth. Right, the macrocosm and the microcosm. Um, and so it's supernature, as we would say in our English, modern English, but not in the sense that it's somehow um, ultimately distinct from nature. It's still a part of that which is created, and we still have to talk about the creator, which isn't supernature or nature. And one cannot invoke supernature to explain nature because one has left out uh, the creator of that supernatural, natural creation. Of course, one can never explain the creator either, or what the creator's plan might be, what the creator wants of its creation. So this leaves us in a difficult situation morally and theologically. It's difficult or impossible, in fact, for a finite human being to explain the infinite. Again, I agree with Corey here that it is the infinite, it is the sublime, and the sense of wonder we feel in relation to the sublime um, that is the source of and responsible for informing every thought that we have. Unless the human being is in relationship to the infinite, they are not in relationship to knowledge or to truth, to true thought, at least. And I really love what Corey says about, you know, cosmology and the anthropic principle, that consciousness, human consciousness, never could have not been, or it was always already a sort of nascent possibility for the cosmos, for cosmogenesis. There's no way to think of ourselves as if we did not exist. Our very existence, in fact, uh, makes it such that we cannot think our own non-being. And yet, even as we do so, we think non-being. Uh, and that this ontological chasm that opens up when a being thinks its own non-being is the infinite. And it's the mystery of an infinitely complex universe um, that drives our own uh, lives, that makes us wake up in the morning. That's why we think at all. So, just some thoughts in response to Corey, and an attempt to bring these two spheres of thought, science and religion, into a more integral, um, not necessarily systematic understanding, but um, at least a more conversant understanding. Because right now, with this polarization, we can't even talk to each other. we can't even interact, and this has manifestations. This dichotomy between science and religion in other um, modes of our relationship outside of science and religion. It's political too. In America, the Democratic and the Republican are sort of fitting into the same mold that the science and the religious, the scientific and the religious take, where the conservative grasps on to the past in this irrational um, way, and this reactionary way, and the Democrat sort of latches onto this utopian ideal of the rational control of society um, through the scientific and technological. And both parties ultimately in America agree with this sort of technological myth too. But um, and I guess here I'm sort of showing my tendency to lean in the direction of the Democratic Party as just not being as completely regressive as the Republican. But they're both allied with this techno-capitalistic myth of progress. And I think a lot of times it's not only the religious who have what Corey was discussing as a kind of death denial. It's the scientific just as much, or at least the modern scientific worldview lends itself just as easily to a form of death denial as modern forms of religion. Um, think of people like Ray Kurzweil or the transhumanist movements. That's the sort of ideological core beneath um, the sort of progress-oriented or growth-oriented economy that we have. Capitalism, our adherence to the capitalist ideology is rooted in our belief that the future will be better, and that the better future means that medicine and agriculture and you know the necessities we have to exist as organisms will in fact become more and more under our own control until eventually the whole world will be a giant supermarket, and our bodies will be made of plastic parts that we can replace by mail order. That's the capitalist dream, right? Everything commodified. The very sources of life commodified. So, this is both a religious and a scientific nightmare, right? But I don't think it's fair just to focus on religion and leave out science as having been complicit in this industrial makeover of life and the earth in the effort to deny death, overcome death, control life, in order to be immortal in this, basically supernatural way. And there's a lot to this Christian myth that founds our civilization of the fall from the knowledge of good and evil, of the fall resulting from the knowledge of good and evil. Um, has something to do with attempting to steal the power of the Creator. The Bible doesn't sanctify private property. God owns the place. We are His servants, the representatives of His love on the earth. His or her or its earth, not the human. That's not our earth. It's no creature's earth. And so I think there are many resources within the Western mind's own religious history and religious traditions for dealing with the crisis, the social and ecological crisis in which we find ourselves today. We certainly need science and technology as well, but without a complete reimagination of our moral spirit, our religious relationship to the world, our religious, um, you know, sense of being bound to the world, then we're not going to be able to overcome our situation as a civilization, and we're going to go extinct. Evolution is a fact, and it's threatening us with our own species' life. So, science, religion. What do you think?